Barry Kavanagh, auditor with Southwestern Services, who are contracted by Bord Bia to audit Irish dairy farms, starts off by explaining to Kilkenny dairy farmer Brian Daniels what is going to happen over the next 2.5 to 3 hours.
Information collected and that was only for benchmarking purposes, not being scored. Reported herein cannot be construed to include all such non-compliances.
Yeah.
The firm daughter has no conflict of interest in carrying out this audit, has not provided.
The first stop in the farmyard was the dairy, and here Barry checked to see that the building was sealed and clean. He checked milk collection dockets for milk temperatures. He walked around the bulk tank and checked the lid of the tank was sealed properly. He took down PCS numbers from the chemicals that were being used to wash the tank and machining, and checked the windows in the dairy were working, and if they could be opened, that they had fly screens. He also checked to see if there was any build-up of dust or cobwebs over the tank, and that there were no birds nesting in the ceiling. The lock of the JFC medicine cabinet in the dairy was broken, so this was a minor non-compliance issue. The auditor checked mastitis tubes to see that they were in date, and took down the VPA number written on the tubes. Other medicines in stock used for dosing, vaccinating, etc. were checked to see that they were in date and legitimately purchased. From the dairy we walked to the milking parlour, and the auditor walked around the whole parlour to ensure there were lids on all the feeders and that there was no pooling of water on the floor of the pit. Auditor Barry randomly washed and checked 3 or 4 clusters for build-up of residue and questioned Brian how he marks cows that have been treated with antibiotics. Again he checked liners and tubing to make sure everything was in good working order. The sliding door from the dairy to the parlour was not closing properly. It must be tight-fitting, so this was classified as a minor non-compliance issue. Walking down the yard we passed the crush on the way to the cubicle shed. The auditor checked the crush was strong and functional. Before we went to the main cubicle shed, we first went to see one of the calving boxes. Barry checked that the lights and water trucks were working properly. There was a slight cut in the door where the fork of a loader had got caught when cleaning out the shed, so Barry noted this as a minor non-compliance, because it could potentially cut a cow's leg unless it was repaired. Similar to the calving boxes, the auditor checked the cubicle shed for lights, water, and that there were no dangerous obstructions that could damage a cow. He questioned Brian on the basics like how the shed was cleaned and scraped out, etc. At this stage we headed for a group of 32 cows that were still grazing adjacent to the farmyard. We walked to the paddock and Barry randomly took down 4 or 5 numbers to check against the herd register in the office. He walked around the cows to ensure no tails were docked, that cows were clean and in good condition. He noticed one cow was missing a tag, so this was classed as a minor non-compliance issue again. He checked water troughs were working and the boundary fencing was secure. The auditor checked how Brian was controlling water from the shed roof before heading down to check the silage pits. At the pits, Barry checked the effluent was being collected and that the floor of the pits were in good working order. The livestock trailers were checked to ensure they were in good working condition and that the ramp was working properly. The isolation pen was checked to ensure it had a separate airspace, separate feed area, and that the effluent collected was in a separate tank. Brian's slurry was not collected in a separate tank, so again this was noted as a minor non-compliance issue. The locked pesticide shelf was checked to see that the chemicals contained in it were licensed and in date. We popped into the calf shed to check the basics of water, light and air. As we walked back to the farm office, the auditor questioned Brian about how he dehorns calves and if he had a first aid kit on the farm that contained eye drops and plasters. On the way in from the paddocks, we checked the oil tanks and there was a small drop of diesel coming from the dispensing handle, which registered as another minor non-compliance issue. We headed out to the paddock beside the yard to check the pump house and the well. Brian picked up another minor non-compliance at the well because the well hole was not protected good enough and was not fenced off. Once back in the yard, we went into the farm office to check the paperwork. The auditor started off by looking for the herd register, which can be recorded in either the blue book or on farm software. He looked for feed dockets to check for department approval numbers and to check the proteins used in the feed. He didn't want to see any fish meal or tallow in the feed. He asked for vet prescriptions for mastitis tubes he had already seen in the dairy, to check the date, quantity ordered, authorised name of product, and where it came from. He looked for knackery certificates to make sure animals were disposed of by an approved knackery. The farm statement was checked to ensure it was up to date, and that the farm baiting plan for rats and mice was again checked to ensure it was in order. The auditor looked for a full list of medicines, vaccines purchased and usage recorded, etc. He looked to see the record of one cow to show the details of when the last round of medicine was administered, the name and quantity of the product used, withdrawal dates, who administered, and prescription details. While the auditor was checking paperwork, he gave Brian a printed questionnaire with a number of questions relating to sustainability and carbon footprint. This covers a number of areas such as the number of days at grass, meal fed to cow, fertiliser and energy usage, slurry management, recycling of water and biodiversity, etc. The auditor looked for the farm herd health plan, and Brian showed him a calendar of herd health events on the farm. In total, the on-farm audit process took 2 hours and 45 minutes to complete. Brian had prior notice of the visit, and when I asked him had he spent much time preparing for the audit, he said maybe 5 hours. Auditor Barry finished by explaining to Brian that his business had performed extremely well in the audit, and all paperwork and construction were top of the league. He passed the 7 critical compliance areas with flying colours, and had 13 minor non-compliant areas that will need to be touched up by the time of the next visit. Critical non-compliant issues require the farmer to remedy the situation within 4 weeks from the date of audit. Certification lasts 18 months, so the farmer is notified within 14 months by letter that he is due for his next audit. When the auditor was leaving, he gave Brian an audit exit form detailing the total number of non-compliance issues, and this should tally with any further documentation from the farm audit. It is clear the new Board B, a sustainable dairy assurance scheme, takes prior preparation and planning, and is an intensive examination and assessment of an Irish dairy farm business.